Welcome back. Here we are on the first element of team leadership, empathy. Now, I got to be honest, I almost did not use empathy as one of the elements of team leadership because it is such a hot word right now. It's so overused. People don't really know what it means, but I use it because I feel like it's the perfect bridge between self leadership, where we really set you up to be more empathetic with others and compassionate with yourself, and for the rest of our team leadership course. So let's dig in and talk about kind of our definition of empathy. But first, I want to just remind you what's going to come next. After we talk about empathy, it's going to set you up for gratitude, consent, clarity, and boundaries. But in order to create boundaries, in order to understand different perspectives so you can get more clarity across your team. In order to know how to express gratitude to each person on your team, you need to be able to empathize with them. You want to be able to empathize with them, to connect with them human to human. And that can greatly help everyone feel safer and really develop more efficiency on your team. So today, our typical learning objectives, we're going to define what empathy is and what it is not. And we're going to talk about it in practice. We're going to talk about what it feels like when it's in balance, when it's out of balance, and why this matters for leadership. Empathy is incredibly important for leadership. I'm really going to hit home on that. And then we're going to talk about how to integrate empathy starting now. And you're going to walk away with some very concrete tips for how to use empathy to de escalate conflict, which I think is an important tool because we run into that. We're all flawed human beings. So I love this quote by Daniel Lubetzky. He is the executive chairman of Kind. He's I think a Mexican American billionaire, and he says, empathy is one of our greatest tools of business that is the most underused. I would agree with that based on the coaching that I do with executives. Empathy is definitely one of the things that we talk about. And it's an incredible tool that once they start to use it and integrate it into conversations, it has a profound effect on overall morale and people wanting to come to work and motivation. But I think a lot of people have this kind of archaic definition of empathy, which really is the definition of sympathy, which is feeling sorry for other people and trying to fix their problems or make them feel better. I mean, how many times have you had a problem and somebody just swooped in and tried to fix it for you? Like, don't feel upset. We got this, right? Don't feel upset. Don't feel anything. I can't handle the feelings. We got this. We're gonna fix it. That's not empathy. And but empathy is tuning into the emotions or the experiences of another person or group of people. Even right now, I'm trying to use empathy to imagine how you may be feeling taking this course. And the more that I can imagine and get into it, the better, I hope, I'm going to be communicating and relating to you, and you can feel understood, even though, let's face it, you're watching me on video. So, what when we're not using empathy, okay, it's kind of like pacifying a baby, which is very natural to pacify a baby, but a baby has limited coping skills on their own. So empathy starts to be used more when, let's say, a child breaks their toy. Okay, it's really easy to what I was saying earlier, just like, okay, well, here's a new one. Okay, here's, or like, or even worse, we'll deal with it. Too bad. Um, but as a child gets older, taking one of those two approaches really misses an important step, and that step is empathy. This requires a parent to acknowledge the child's sadness first before trying to fix it, to be in it. I know this feels really crappy, doesn't it? Now kids, that's why I chose this video, are naturals at empathy. They see another kid upset on the playground, and many of them will go over and comfort them a little bit and be with them in their sadness. So it's just a human need. So, some examples where there's commonly a lack of empathy in the workplace. I see this a lot with shaming. And we talked about shaming in the shoulds and the self-compassion module when we did the self-leadership course. But shaming is like, well, you should have done this and you should have done that. And how could this have gone wrong? You really should have done it this way. And it's, I think a leader often thinks that they're going to prevent that problem from happening again by really focusing on what went wrong. But really, what that does is it tells the employee, like, you're defective. All right. And that's how an employee or a staff member or a team member feels when there's this hyper focus on what's going wrong. We also see it in conflict escalation when two people continually assert, no, this is my view, this is the way it happened, this is the way it happened, and they don't want to hear another person's perspective. They don't want to think about how another person is feeling. They don't want to step into their shoes. That's a lack of empathy. It also happens with mind reading when there's no outward conflict, but there's a lot of tension. And they say, well, they're just doing this because of that. And they're explaining behavior, and as opposed to giving in a negative way, as opposed to giving that person the benefit of the doubt. And giving someone the benefit of the doubt requires a significant amount of empathy. So there's a lot of science behind this that I want to go over because in self leadership we talked a little bit about low brain function and high brain function, but here we're going to talk about that a little bit more because I often use the theory of the triune brain, and that's when your brain is essentially divided into three main parts based on the evolution of the brain. Okay, so you have the lizard brain, some people call it the reptilian brain, that's fight or flight, that's like the base of your brain. And then you have your limbic system, your feeling system, that's your mammal brain. And then you have your human brain, that's your thinking and your logic brain, where your prefrontal cortex lives. And we want people to be bringing that thinking, that logic brain to work because that's where they're creative, they're problem solving, they can deeply connect. But if they're not feeling safe, if they are in lizard brain, they're not going to jump to human brain. You have to go through the limbic system, through the mammal brain. You have to use empathy. So empathy is the bridge between fight or flight and higher brain function and higher brain processing that you want people to be showing up with in the workplace. So it's absolutely essential if you want the best performance you can get from your employees. So let's talk about empathy when it is out of balance. A leader, perhaps yourself or a leader seems really out of touch. They don't seem to see people. They don't recognize when another person is having a hard day. They're unaware or ignore that interpersonal tension. So when there's stuff going on and there's clearly some passive aggression or some tension in the room, they just like, well, they'll figure it out, or they'll ignore it, as opposed to kind of tuning into it. And sometimes, okay, it's all right to ignore it and let people figure it out. But if you haven't developed self leaders who have the capability of figuring that out, you might need to step in. And they often say things like, it's not personal. Now, later we'll get into setting up boundaries and asking for consent and clarity, and there are times when when boundaries may not be personal, but when someone gets to the point where if somebody else feels offended, if somebody else feels upset, it is now personal to them. Okay, and you have to address the fact that it is now personal to them, and that's where empathy comes in. Leaders who are out of balance in empathy can also be pretty critical. They only point out mistakes and failures, and they often feel very frustrated with underperformance from their team and staff. And they describe it, they explain it with those negative labels. And this often comes from the self criticism, which again is why we do self leadership first. And so hopefully you are noticing where you tend to be a little bit more critical, where you tend to point out those mistakes and failures. We all do it, but it's helpful to bring some empathy into the mix and say, okay, what's happening? What are they feeling here? What about their human nature is contributing to this outcome? And leaders who are low on empathy are typically more narcissistic. They see their staff or their team as a reflection of themselves, and they really only care about what the team can do for them. And this may not happen all the time. It could happen in certain scenarios, but then in those certain scenarios, empathy is out of balance. And they tend to scapegoat others. Oh, well, it was Jerry's fault. I use Jerry a lot. Jerry's like my new Karen. And you'll see a culture of fear because nobody feels seen or heard or understood or cared about, and the staff is treated like robots instead of human beings because there are no feelings involved, and discussions rarely occur about what's going well. So there's very little celebration. It's just focus on what's wrong with the computer that is my staff. So, what are our empathy goals? What does empathy look like when it's really in balance? Leaders tuned in. They notice subtle positive and negative changes in people day to day. They listen and ask questions. Asking questions is very important, much more than they speak. And they carry candid conversations, honest, vulnerable, brave conversations that acknowledge feelings, including their own. They really connect with people, they tune into them, and they're encouraging. They acknowledge what's going well so that their staff knows to do more of it. And they cheer on staff who are obviously trying to grow and taking risks, even if they fall flat on their face. Like, get up and try it again. Let's try something different. And they refrain from using labels, especially negative labels, to describe others. Instead they go ask about it. Hey, I noticed that there's a little bit of a change today. What's up? They have a direct but safe conversation about it. And they model service. They help with small jobs. They publicly acknowledge individuals who complete mundane tasks, individuals who can often be invisible to the rest of the office. And they make sure that those people feel seen. A really cool story. A local CEO who is now passed, Fred Meyer. I heard a story that he used to late at night walk around the parking lot. Now he was like a supermarket, like mega, I think he's a billionaire. I don't know, multimillionaire, and he would walk around picking up trash, and that really stuck with me. Here he was like executive chairman of his company, totally removed from it in many ways in terms of the day-to-day operation. And he would walk around the parking lot late at night picking up trash. That is a servant leader. And that servant leader will also publicly acknowledge those individuals who complete similar mundane tasks. And, that's the kind of person who will step in and help with small jobs and model that every single person here is important. Such a cool story. And leaders who are high on empathy will also be more collaborative because they want everyone to feel seen and heard. So every idea is given weight and consideration. And even small micro achievements, every idea is, celebrated. Right? When we move forward, when we take a risk, when we make a micro achievement, when even that micro achievement is learning from a mistake, that's celebrated. And so it creates a very positive, forward moving, motivating atmosphere where people feel safe and they can bring their highest brain function to work. That's what we want. Empathy sounds like when you're using it with others, and this is a little bit different than the self-talk because you're using this language with another person. It sounds like I sense that, I imagine that, and to get more specific, it's like, I sense that something's a little off today. What's up? Or, I imagine if you were hearing this information, I imagine that you're feeling pretty upset about hearing this information. It's tuning into them. It's recognizing you have feelings and you are an individual. And let's sit and talk about those. And I'm going to be with you while you experience them. So let's talk about empathy and leadership. Who would you rather work for? Do you want to work with a leader who's tuned out or who acknowledges everyone's feelings? Someone who like hyper focuses on mistakes and failures or who celebrates those small wins? Would you want to work for someone who uses like a negative labels like lazy? You hear that often, or who demonstrates gratitude even for small tasks. Someone who like lives vicariously through your work or sees you as a reflection of themselves or gets dirty and works with you, picks up that trash in the parking lot. And would you want to work for someone who is critical or encouraging or kind of sees you all as robots or sees you all as humans? A leader with empathy and a leader without empathy show up in very different ways. And that is, in a sense, their staff is a reflection of them. If the staff feels safe, if the staff feels seen and heard, it demonstrates that that leader is strong on empathy. So, hopefully by now you can see how self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-governance, self-compassion, self-validation, all of those things help you be more empathetic with others. And that's going to allow you to see someone's positive attributes and call it out and thank them for it. To say, you know what, they might not be cool with this and I want to get their buy-in, so I'm going to ask for their consent. To say, hey, I sense that they may not have walked away from this conversation totally clear. Let me go ask them about it. And you know what? Um, they're encroaching on my boundaries and it's making me upset, and I may be encroaching on theirs. So let's have an open conversation about it. Empathy is required for all of the other elements of team leadership, and all of the elements of self leadership are required to be empathetic. Let's review. Can't believe we're at the review already. So, empathy is not feeling sorry for other people and trying to fix their problems or make them feel better. It's about seeing them, it's about tuning in to the emotions and experiences of another person or a group of people, of one individual on your team or the whole team, of one person in your 600-person company or all of them. Hopefully, all of them. And when empathy is out of balance, a leader is out of touch, critical, narcissistic, and creates a culture of fear. And when it's imbalanced, a leader, hopefully you, are tuned in, encouraging. You show servitude. You want to show up as a servant, and you are collaborative. And it sounds like I sense you may be feeling, I imagine you feel, if I were in your shoes, I would there's a million different ways to say this, but the more important thing is that like I I recognize that you're feeling something, right? And I'm trying to kind of guess what it is. And it gives them an opportunity to clarify for you what it is. And then you're talking about feelings. You're accessing that mammal brain and helping them feel safe and elevate them to human brain, to higher brain function. So we defined empathy. It's seeing and tuning into people, not sympathy and feeling bad for them or just trying to fix something. And we've talked about what it looks like when it's in balance and out of balance. We know why it's important for leadership to help people use that higher brain function and help them feel safe and seen and heard. Now let's talk about some concrete tips and questions that I'm going to ask you for how you can integrate it. So let's start with the questions. I just want you to take a tally. How often do you point out like, mistakes and flaws and problems versus successes and growth? When we were taking a test as kids, we looked at the wrong answers, right? So you could learn them, but that's really challenging in an organization because people can do more of what's right faster if you tell them what they're doing right. And we'll talk about that more next week. We'll really dig into that in the gratitude module. And question number two, how can you use more feeling language in your conversations to connect, to utilize that mammal brain, that limbic system, to elevate them to human brain? And how can you demonstrate servant leadership for your team? And how can you proactively do it on a regular basis, like Fred Meyer, who walked around the parking lot picking up trash? And again, you'll have time to really think about these questions and answer them in the next lesson. But I want to give you this tip, much like I gave you a similar tip for self compassion. This is a three-step series for when there may be a conflict or an issue that has a lot of tension underlying it. And when that happens, this if you follow this little formula, it can be really helpful for you to getting to the bottom of it. And instead of finding a solution, you can also set a boundary. But so let's walk through it. So first you imagine their emotions. And the reason why you imagine their emotions instead of asking them to imagine yours, okay, when there's a conflict, is because it forces you to empathize and it makes them feel like you're empathizing with them, which helps them access their mammal brain. Otherwise, like you're asking them just to empathize with you and to help you get into mammal brain. Okay. So you have to be ready to do this first. You imagine their emotions. I imagine you feel blank. And then give them an opportunity to clarify, and then you express your emotions. I feel blank. So then you're talking about feelings, right? You're having an honest, vulnerable, real conversation. You say, okay, we both feel this way. How do we find a solution? And ask them what they think. And you offer some ideas. And then you're working toward a solution together from a place of understanding each other and from a place of feeling, quite frankly, less stressed out. You're not in fight or flight anymore. You're collaborating. Or you can say, you know, here's my boundary here. What where's your boundary? Right? And we'll talk about this more in the boundaries module. So this will make more sense then. But for now, when you have a conflict, imagine their emotions, give them an opportunity to clarify, express your emotions, find a solution. Ask, how can we come to a solution? And listen to their answer, listen to their ideas and try to collaborate with them. That will be a very helpful tool, I promise you. So, in terms of an action step this week, same deal. Write down in the next lesson one teeny tiny action step you can try to start experimenting with. Depending on where you are in empathy and depending on the scenario, this is going to look different for everybody. So think of something that's right for you. And as usual, if you have trouble thinking of something, visit our LinkedIn group because there will be tons of ideas there. I'm always going to be in there asking people their ideas, trying to generate new ideas because I know sometimes it can be challenging to come up with a tip on, just like a task on your own. But perhaps you already have. My hope is that organically, as you go through this, you're like, oh, yep, I see myself there. I want to improve that. In which case, that's a great starting point to set your action step for the week. So, next week, we're going to talk about gratitude, which I think is equally as essential as empathy. And when it's out of balance versus in balance, you'll know that you're withdrawn versus confidently creative. Your staff may feel dejected instead of empowered, like they're never good enough instead of progressively trying to get better. And the environment may feel too serious instead of being fun and utilizing humor to lighten the atmosphere. In summary, I think the most important takeaway from today, and we didn't really dig too deep about it, but we talked around it, is that empathy increases engagement. People who are seen and heard want to engage. They don't withdraw. When you feel invisible, sometimes you act invisible, and when you feel seen, you lean in and want to continue to be seen and see others. So empathy, if you're struggling with engagement on your team, empathy is a great way to help turn that engagement up. Awesome. I can't wait to talk to you more in our LinkedIn group, and I'll see you next week.